Do you have a story you want to share with the world, but are afraid you're too old to learn new skills and publish a book? After earning her master's degree in creative writing at the age of 71, our guest, Mildred J. Mills, launched a podcast called My Cotton Patch Moment, and she got her book Daddy's House, a daughter's memoir of setbacks, triumphs, and growing new roots, published at the age of 72. You'll find the inspiration you need to start writing from Mildred's fascinating stories, and you'll love listening to her captivating voice. Stay tuned for a delicious conversation. Welcome to Don't Be Caged by Your Age, a podcast devoted to dissolving ageist beliefs and fears and providing pathways for you to repurpose, reimagine, and reinvent your decades of lived experiences. I'm your host, Andy Lyons, celebrating my 67th year of living, and I know you'll find the resources, ideas, and inspiration you need to thrive after 65. Welcome to Don't Be Caged by Your Age, Mildred. I'm so happy you're here to share your insights and stories with our listeners.
Well, thank you, Andy. It is so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Mildred, before we get started, share with everybody, what is your age and where are you from?
I am 72 years old. I am from Wetumpka, Alabama, but I live in Atlanta, Georgia.
Beautiful part of the world. Mildred, you have lived a very full life, which is a blessing that comes with aging, right, folks? So share with listeners a brief recap. I know it's hard because it's decades worth, but some little highlights of your lived experiences over the last 50 years. Did you work outside the home? Did you raise children? Some of those goodies.
I left home at age 18. I left Wetumpka at age 18, moved to Columbus, Ohio to go to a computer school. Think about that. In 1969, I'd never even heard of a computer at that time, but I went away to learn how to program computer boards. And so from Columbus, well, I lived there for a year. I finished my little tech degree or whatever. Actually worked at Ohio State for a little while. And then situation in Columbus had me moving on. So I ended up in Dayton, Ohio, where I started college. And by golly, life happened. I had a child at age 20 and got married shortly after that. And I put that technical degree to work. I worked for General Motors for, oh my gosh, 17 years, actually 13 years. And during that 13 years, I married, I had a child, I married, I divorced, and I ended up married again. So, anyway, so yes, I did work outside the home. I
And
raised a family. I have two children that I birthed, and then I have a bonus child, my husband's daughter. So,
oh,
yeah,
that's
we're a blended
wonderful.
family of.
Well, and we're going to dive into more details about Mildred's background, folks, when you hear how she hasn't been caged by her age and how she's dissolved some of those ageist beliefs that we end up with over the years. As you were continuing to build and live your life, when you entered the 50s and looking ahead to, quote, the golden years, what initial thoughts did you have for this time in your life? Did you experience your own internalized ageist limitations and what you would be doing during this time? What were your
No,
thoughts?
it's so funny that you should ask that. I was thinking about that question and I thought, I never thought about aging. I've just kind of gotten up and lived one day at a time. And every day I get up expecting to accomplish something. And I've never thought that age would be a limit, would put any limitations on me. In fact, I saw my father aging very well. He lived to 94 and he actually died of liver failure. The interesting thing is, every time I'd call and wish him a happy birthday, I said, "Happy birthday, Dad. How's it feel to be such and such?" He said, "Feel like I'm 16 years old." Right up until that last year when he got, really ill. But before that, the guy was 90 years old, driving a tractor, still planting a garden. So age has never bothered me. I remember turning 25 and thinking, oh my God, I'm a quarter century old. And that's the last time I ever thought about age.
I know. I think we worry more about turning 30 than we did, turning 60. And
Yeah,
that's so fascinating that you had a dad that provided such great representation. And throughout your podcast, you're always saying, I'm going to live until I die. I feel like that's his voice also coming through you
yep,
in a way that reminds you to just keep on living. What I have learned in pursuing and pulling on threads about ageist beliefs, Mildred, is that many folks, especially if they've been in a corporate job and a long term job, are actually getting frightened as they turn 65 because they think, oh my gosh, I'm going to be set out to pasture. I'm not ready to go out to pasture. I'm at the top of my game. I don't want to lose these connections. I don't want to stop living, so to speak. And so being able to have that representation of your dad, I feel like I'm 16. It really shows that age is a state of mind, right?
absolutely. It does. In fact, you talk about corporate America there and thinking, oh gosh, they're going to put me out to pasture or whatever. So at age 50, I actually had a horrendous experience in corporate America. And I left corporate America. And I didn't know that I felt so shackled while I was there.
Wow.
When I left, I thought, oh my God, this feels like freedom.
Total.
So I ended up doing some very different things with my life.
How did you reinvent and repurpose and reimagine yourself in your 50s?
Well, in my 50s, I actually found my softer self, which I didn't realize that I had lost. I actually went and volunteered at a women's shelter and at a children's hospital. And at the children's hospital, I ended up reading to children, and some of them wanted to hear stories, fantasy stories, but some of those kids actually wanted to hear Bible readings. And at the women's shelter, I listened to all these women talk about violence and abuse and why they were in that shelter and what they wanted to do with themselves after leaving there. And I did mock interviews to help them get back into the workplace. And I just felt so useful doing that kind of thing. And I reimagined myself. At the time I hadn't thought anything about writing a book. And after years of working at this shelter or volunteering at that shelter, I went and interviewed my mother. She was 80 years old. I was 55. And I said, I'm going to go interview the first domestic violence victim that I know.
That's
And
right.
so I showed up with my little tape recorder. At the time, I was living in Houston. I showed up with my tape recorder and I said, Mom, I really want to get to know you. I said, I want to know you from the first memory that you can recall until today. I just want to get to know you because I didn't feel like I did know her. I knew her as my mother, but I didn't know her as this child. And we ended up talking for 4 hours, and I recorded that conversation. She was 80, as I stated, and I would not know that 2 years later, my mother would be deceased.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I still have her voice. So, what I said to her when I was about to record, I said, Mom, someday I may write a book. I hadn't decided at that time that I was going to. And I said, my life is no life without your life, or my story is no story without your story. So that's how
That
in my 50s I kind of repurposed myself and kept it moving.
that is a beautiful quote, by the way.
I thank you.
Gorgeous quote to say, and a gift to your mom. I wouldn't be in my life if it hadn't been for you and your life.
Right.
And the fact that you were able to capture her and have her tell the meaningful story. So often people get into the chronological story, and then this happened at this date and that happened. But you were asking the probing questions. How did that
Yes.
feel? Right. And what was that experience like? And listeners, Mildred and I are old enough to know that shelters that you were volunteering at, Mildred, did not
Yes.
exist until 1976, folks. That's a very short time ago, 50
Yes.
years, not even. Women who were abused would have to go and hang out for safety at a jail. That was
Yes.
the only option. So thank you for bringing that up. And then, of course, the fond memory of tape cassette. And I'm so glad you captured her voice because that is something that you can always treasure. And as you said, use for when you were ready to write the book.
Right.
So, what compelled you to launch your podcast? And folks, Mildred has this amazing podcast. You hear her rich and beautiful voice right now. You should hear it on her podcast, telling the most incredible stories. No wonder those children loved and said, "Oh, please, Mrs. Mills, please read this for us or read that for us because you have such a compelling voice." Her podcast is called My Cotton Patch Moment. You launched it just recently, I believe, in the spring of 2023.
I did.
And what compelled you to do that?
I went back to school in 2020 to get a master's in creative writing. And so it was actually the
So you
fall
were
of,
68 when you went back to school, or
no, I
60?
was 69 when I went
Oh
back. Yes, I
my.
was 68, almost 69 when I went back to school. And I actually graduated in 2022 at the age of 71.
Oh, wait a minute. I got to get the clappers out, everybody. Come on. Let's do it. Just let's all do a round of applause for
Oh, well,
Mildred.
thank you so much for that. But
Oh,
so I had my book. This book was my thesis in my grad program. And so I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I've written this book. So now I'm just going to go off and sell it and publish it and sell it and yada, yada, yada. And boy, was I stunned when someone said, well, what's your platform? I thought, my platform? What is that? And so this woman in this marketing class sits there and says, well, I want you all to sit here and tell me how you're going to market your book. How are you going to build this platform? And I'm thinking, wow,
is
how
that
am
really
I
my
going
job?
to do
I did
that?
the hard work already. I wrote
Yeah.
it.
I mean, I thought the hard job was already over. So I'm sitting there looking around this class, and we're sitting in a semicircle, and the instructor is sitting up front, and she said, all right, I'm going to give you 15 minutes to come up with a way in which you're going to market this book, build your platform. And I looked around that classroom, and there are people as young as 22, and there was a woman probably 80 years old in there. And so I said to myself, I'm thinking back on this book and I'm thinking back on that background. And I said to myself, I wonder if anybody in here has ever picked cotton. And of course, oh, by the way, I'm at residency in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. I was the only Southerner in that room.
Wow.
So I decided, well, maybe I'll do a podcast. So many people had been saying, you should do a podcast. You have this voice, you have this story. And I said, what would I call this podcast? And initially I said, have you ever picked cotton? And when I launched that idea to that class, I said, I don't mean a literal cotton field. I mean a figurative cotton patch. Like, what is that thing in your life that moved you along and made you think, this is not going to be my life? So
Those
when
wonderful contrast moments that show you what you don't want, listeners,
yes,
right?
absolutely. It's when you come to that fork in the road and you say, oh boy, I've got to turn left or right. I can't go straight because this is just not going to be my life. And the room actually loved it. And it took me from, say, September until March when I actually launched it. I thought about it and I researched it and I thought some more. And then I finally ran across on the internet our friend, yours and mine,
That's right.
Bethany Hawkins. And I said, I've got all this equipment and I had actually done a little bit of recording. And so, therefore, my cotton patch moment was born.
I love that something fierce. And yes, a big shout out to Bethany Hawkins, founder of Crackers in Soup. She
Yep.
does everything from A to Z to help you launch a podcast, folks. So if you're thinking you'd like to have a podcast, I'll have Bethany's contact info in the show notes for you. Now, let's just touch a little bit also, because this is so wonderful that, again, you were wrapping up at your master's degree and you said, well, why not launch a podcast so I can start building a platform to then promote my book?
Yep.
Let's tie in this book because this book is so poignant and so beautiful. And it's called Daddy's House. So I first need you to share what compelled you to write that book. I know you'd had the interview with your mom, but you obviously you felt so strongly that you had a voice and you had some thoughts to share that you went back and got your master's degree so that you could feel even more bona fide and bringing that to the world, I imagine, but also to get the skill set that you need to really articulate what you wanted to say in a meaningful way that would touch folks' lives. But heck, I can count dozens of people I know who talk about writing a book and then even write it. But you got fierce about getting it published. This is what's so amazing. So let us know what called you to write it, what the name of the book is, and what it's about.
The name of the book is Daddy's House, a daughter's memoir of setbacks, triumphs, and rising above her roots. And what compelled me to write that book is years ago, probably maybe 10 or even 15 years ago, I was not busy enough. I thought, in fact, it was during that time in which I had left corporate America. I
Mm-hmm.
decided to take an English class just to help keep myself busy. And the first day of that class, this instructor said, at the end of this class, we will all have written a short story about something important in our lives. And I almost dropped that class because I thought there is nothing interesting about my life. What would I possibly write about? And
Hey,
then,
listeners, let us know if you've ever had that thought about yourself in your life. Okay. Be sure to pop that into the comments, both either
yeah,
on
and
LinkedIn or on Instagram. And so after you got over that limiting belief, what happened?
yeah. And then what happened is I went home one evening and I was thinking about what could I possibly write. So I had this pen and paper and I started stabbing that paper and I was writing, writing, writing. And what came out of that is this short story entitled My Wall of Shame. And at the end of that class, I mean, the very end, when the class was over, this instructor looked at me and she said, I'd like to see you after class. And I'm thinking, well, the class is over. So what can we talk about? And she looked at me and then she looked at that paper and she kept doing this. And I thought, okay. She said, you don't look like a woman who would be abused. I said, trust me, lady, I'm not. With attitude, because when I left the farm, I knew I would never be hit again by
Right.
anyone. So she said, this is not fiction. This is true story. I said, it is. It's my mother's story. And she said, please write this story, expand upon it, and tell it with the same passion that you have written this short story. And it probably took 5 more years before I did anything with that because I hadn't interviewed my mother at that time. But after interviewing mom, I decided that, I had been writing things all of my life, just little notes here and there. And one time in my life, I was writing a journal. Someone stole it, or it certainly disappeared from where I had it. So I never journaled again, but I journaled like notes on the computer and this kind of thing. And then one day I just decided I'm going to do this. And the interesting thing is, I was writing my father as this horrible antagonist at the time. And I decided, you really need to learn how to write a book that will resonate with people. You can't be an angry lady. I mean, you can't write an angry book and you can't write an all happy book because there's so much in between that. And I had this wonderful mentor in grad school, Beverly D'Onofrio. I don't know if you know that name or not, but she wrote Riding in Cars with Boys, which ended up being a movie that, let's see, I don't remember who starred in that movie.
Well, I'm
Uh,
sure folks will be commenting and reminding us.
yes,
That's an incredible mentor to have. How did you build that relationship?
yes. But how did I build that relationship?
Yeah, that she became your mentor.
Yeah, well, she was recommended by the director of the program at the school. In fact, I had a choice of three people, and Bev and I just hit it off. I think she's a year older than I am, and we just hit it off. And so I didn't have classmates in this class. I actually had it was the two of us. I would sign a contract at the beginning of every semester. I'd say, here's what I'm going to produce. And she would actually go through all of this. And she instructed me and directed me on how to move through this book. And so I just keep saying, "Oh, Beth, thank you so much. You brought the raw talent." She said, "You had that story all along. It was a beautiful story." And what she taught me more than anything was just the transitioning from place to place. Because sometimes, I guess, as a raw writer, you might just write things down as you think about them, and they're not exactly in the best order or whatever. So, whatever I spent for those 2 years of education was more than worth the money that I spent to have this incredible mentor and to have this book.
Oh my gosh. What a thread of circumstances you just pulled on there and shared with us. Thank you so much, Mildred. It's so powerful, folks, to just allow people to come into our lives and help us.
Yes.
And I think that's what helped you be able to transition from I'm going to write a book to I've written something that might have substance that others are saying will have meaning for others to read and hear, but I need to get better at how I do it. And you didn't sit there and say, well, I'm too old to do that. No, I'm going to jump into this class. I'm going to get the skills and everything else that I need to really bring this to life and be willing to make the mistakes, be a learner, and let someone mentor me because you're already a smart, capable woman who understands life, but there are still tricks to the trade, so to speak, right, Mildred? That we
Yes.
have to learn, that we have to allow people to teach us, even if we're in our late 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, right?
Right.
Someone's got something that you need. And you too are, of course, giving out into the world in other ways. But wow, Beverly, what a gift to have mentored you to bring this beautiful book, Daddy's House. Links are going to be in the show notes, everybody. And I also appreciate the representation that you're providing, Mildred, for stretching outside your comfort zone and addressing any, issues that you might have felt, but also you tend to be a lot like an observer, meaning I think you have a unique capability to look outside at what you want to do as an experiment. As somebody
Yes.
goes, okay, if I do this and that, and this, I'll be able to pull this project together and it'll be a journey and I'll learn something along the way. Does that
Absolutely.
resonate with you?
Yes. Actually, one of the things that I have been an avid reader all of my life, even before I could read, I would look at the pictures in books like Jack and the Beanstalk or Aladdin's Magic Lantern or one of those things. And so as I grew older and I just had started thinking about writing a book, I looked in the back of these books that I absolutely loved and I thought, what are the requirements or qualifications to writing a good book? Anybody, I think, can write a book, but I don't want to just write a book. I've got this thing where I'm not a perfectionist, but I sure do believe in excellence. So
Right.
I wanted to write an excellent book that resonated with people. So I saw these MFAs and masters in creative writing and so forth and so on. And I also read about a stunning statistic. There are millions of people who start to write a book. Only 3% actually finish that book, and less than 1% publish a book. And I thought, well, I'm going to be in that less than 1%. So I did. And writing that book was a journey. And it was the best therapy I could have ever given myself. And I didn't even have, well, I did pay for it. I went for that master's,
That's
but I
right.
paid for it emotionally. I cried, I laughed. I laughed out loud. I went back to places where I didn't even remember that I had been, but suddenly there they were.
And the healing process that happens and the reframing, because we all get indoctrinated and all these things happen. And folks, you understand that we have these internal family systems that all have voices as well. The beauty about your diving into this book and your story and being willing to look at it and revisit some of the painful times, especially, allowed you to not only heal, but reframe what happened in a way that lessens the burden
Yes.
of what happened. I mean, listeners, what you'll find out just seeing the excerpts from Daddy's House, Mildred is Like the third of how many children?
Third of 17.
Yeah, siblings.
Same mom and dad, by the way.
Same mom and dad. That's like, oh, your mother. I say in the South, bless her heart, right? That was a lot of souls to be responsible for. And let's talk a little bit about that bar of excellence. We all have how we want to bring something to the world. And sometimes we can get caught in our perfectionism, which can be the death of creativity if we're not too careful. We do need to stop at some point and let those words come out. But I love that you were willing to go back to school, invest in yourself so that you could deliver what you felt most comfortable with, which was an excellence of structure as well as storytelling. Yes?
Yes.
Oh, that's so good. So, as you look on this experience of not letting your age cage you from doing all these things that you wanted to do, what encouraging thoughts can you share with listeners who may be thinking about sharing their stories in a book or a podcast?
The thing that I would share, especially about that book, is don't let fear stop you from telling that story. There are so many people who need to hear these stories. This past Saturday, I was invited to a book signing. This book club had read my book, and it was a wonderful group of women. In fact, I've done a few of these. And the thing that is so encouraging to me is these people say, you had to become so vulnerable and you are so brave to tell that story because some horrendous things happened to me in my life. I had much joy, but I was gang raped. And to go and tell this story and talk about domestic violence and talk about things that we are ashamed of and things that we believe people will judge us for. I mean, to be able to just go tell that story. And of course, they always ask, well, what does your family think about this? I said, listen, when both my parents were deceased, the pen and paper came out. Nothing else mattered. Now, I would never want to embarrass or shame my parents. I think my mother would be so proud. She'd be sitting there like a peahen talking about her daughter and her book. And so, dad might have he might feel some kind of way, but I still think that deep inside, he would have to be proud that I did it. You
Well,
know,
and you did it with a voice and a purpose of recovery
yes.
versus victimization.
Absolutely. I have never been a victim in my life, and I don't plan, and I will die not being a victim because things happen to all of us. And it
Yes.
isn't the things that happen to you, it's how you deal with those things that happen to you. And I told both my children as they were growing up, I said, it isn't the bump in the road that you hit. Don't just sit there. It's a bump. Get out of it and keep it moving. You have a car, and that's a little bump. So keep moving.
And people have to understand adversity is there. Okay.
Yes,
Life is hard,
it is.
but we have the ability to manage that. And I think a disservice is to let people know that it's all happiness and flowers and Bambi and the birds. It isn't.
Bambi and the birds. Hadn't heard that one yet.
From yeah, well, that's our childhood, right? The Bambi and everybody out there, but it isn't. But what we also have to remind our children and others is that you have the ability to go through it. Nobody gets out of life. I mean, there might be one or two who have the ideal never a challenge in their lives, but most of us are confronted, and it's very real. And it's very real for who's ever going through it.
Yep.
And I agree with the folks who told you that your ability to be vulnerable and tell that story and some of the horrific, hard things that happened to you, but how you chose to move through them and onward. Sometimes, yes, it's in our DNA. We got packaged with the strength to do that. But also, it's understanding that what's between our ears is a great tool, and that's our
Yes.
brain and our mind, and to put it to use so that we don't focus on the victim, we focus on the recovery while
Yes.
honoring the very difficult things that happen. Oh my gosh. Yes. Mom and dad, but mom especially, would be so proud of you for sharing
Yes.
your impeccable words in such a beautiful way. I just have a few questions before we wrap up. What does retired mean to you?
Retire What is retire? I don't know what that even means. I read an article recently in the AARP magazine about ageism, and it talks about these people that we call, I don't remember exactly what they called them, but they're these folks that are in their 80s and 90s and still doing amazing things.
Right.
And so I don't think about being retired. My son said, "These are your golden years. I thought that you were retired." He said, because when he calls and I says, "Well, I'm busy, yada, yada, yada." And he says, "Well, gosh." And now he says, "Mom, congratulations. I'm so proud of you." And I don't know what retired is.
Right.
I have so many things that I plan to do, so many goals that I intend to achieve. People keep saying, "Well, what about that second book?" Well, I was writing a book before I wrote this one. So, at some point I intend to finish that. And I want to be a coach. I want to be a life coach because I get all these people wanting me to help them through their stuff since I've written this tough, tough book. And I'm so brave. And I'm thinking, well, if I'm going to spend all my time doing these things, I should get certified and get paid for it. So,
There
you
you
know.
go. I love that. Absolutely. It's wonderful, listeners, to be able to not just reinvent and repurpose this incredible lived experience of decades, but to really see how you can reimagine what life looks like in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And Mildred, as we look internally to see how we've internalized ageist beliefs, how would you like to see society and corporations view folks over 60? Because right now, they think you're reaching your 60s, you have no ambition, you don't want to learn more. Why would they waste money on you to have you to have further training or growth opportunities? What would you like to see change?
What I would like to see change is for corporate America and even people outside of corporate America, our children and grandchildren and society as a whole look at older people as done. I wish that we would treat each other as some of the other cultures do their elders. They look to them for advice and set sage advice, that kind of thing. Where I would prefer that we were treated respectfully rather than, "Well, you're too dang old to be around here anymore," that kind of thing. And I think that a number of these companies, I hope they realize that they put some of these older people out to pasture. And what I've seen in some of the later years is they're bringing these people back as consultants because, first of all, they will get up and go to work. And second of all, they just want to work. And so some of these younger folks, as I understand it, you need to go jump through all these hoops to make them come to work in the first place and to make them feel like, well, why should I do that job? I'm going to do it my way. I should sit here and talk on my phone all day, yada, yada, yada. So, how I don't know if you worked in corporate America or not, but anyway, years ago they used to do these studies and to determine what kind of personality you were,
Right.
kind of
Yes.
thing, and to see
Hmm.
what people you work well with. I think they should continue doing those things to determine the value of the people that are in that corporation.
Absolutely. And how they can be repurposed within the corporation if they want to stay. And what
Yep.
does that look like? And does it need to be a 40, 50, 60-hour week? Can it be a 30, right?
Yes.
And you're right about aging provides wisdom and temperance because you have
Yes.
so much experience, lived experiences that you realize I don't need to get my panties in a twist over that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the crazy thing is, most of these corporations have educated these people that they're pushing out to pastor and their investment, a huge investment.
Right. And a
So, what do
knowledge
you
base.
think?
Exactly. Well, and listeners, hop on to episode 1 with Victoria Tomlinson because she has the stats and she talks about how a generation of talent gets wasted by
Yeah,
having that indoctrination of, oh, you're 65, you're out of here. And so, how she's working with corporations to help them really utilize and take advantage of all this wisdom and knowledge and the ability to learn. Just because you're over a certain age doesn't mean your brain stops working. So You have provided such wonderful representation, Mildred, and listeners, we want to know your thoughts and comments. So hop on over to LinkedIn, to the Don't Be Caged by Your Age page, or onto Instagram, and share your thoughts and concerns and fears, and perhaps how you have reinvented yourself and repurposed your incredible lived experience. And be sure to follow Mildred everywhere she glows. You have to listen to her podcast. It is so wonderful. And Mildred, you just have a way of using words and that beautiful tonality of your voice. I could listen to you all day. And I will have links to Mildred's podcast and her book, Daddy's House, in the show notes. And if you want to have Mildred even come in on a Zoom call to talk about her book, Daddy's House, you know how to reach out to her through the show notes. Mildred, any last thoughts for listeners about living until I die, which you talk about a lot in your podcast, and I love that about you.
Yes, actually, living until you die means just getting up with purpose. I'm lying in bed there morning thinking, okay, I've got to do this, 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 and this. And, I've got all these things going on and I have all these little projects. And I thought, I really do need to duplicate myself somehow because suddenly I've become so busy. But I would love for listeners to know that I love my book. I enjoyed the life that I have lived, and I would love if there are book clubs out there or even people that I'd love to have a sponsor. I will travel to talk about the book. And if your book club has read my book or considered reading my book, right now I would love for you to do just that. I am happy to come and talk to you about that book and the experiences that I went through. In fact, one last thing,
Yes.
I can be found on social media at Mildred J Mills everywhere. But recently, the library in Wetumpka, Alabama, put my book on the shelves. It is now cataloged and in that library. So I
Oh,
am so thrilled at
congratulations.
where this book is going and the recognition that it's getting.
Oh, that's wonderful news. Libraries are having a great comeback. Ever since
Yes,
they start
yes,
banning
they
the
are.
books, it's like, wait a minute. And now all of a sudden libraries are having a whole renaissance period now. It's so exciting. But what an honor to be in the catalog. That is just the best feeling. And that you got published and you found your way there and you learned all those things about publishing today versus what we imagined it was when we were growing up. Thank
Yes.
you for overcoming all those blocks and limitations and just saying yes and being willing to rise to the occasion. I am so honored to have had this moment to chat with you. And I'm so grateful that you joined me on Don't Be Caged by Your Age. It was such a treat to spend time with you and learn from you, Mildred J. Mills.
Thank you so much, Andy. I am thrilled to have been your guest.
Thank you. And listeners, remember, you have so much to give. Don't let those internalized ageist beliefs prevent you from pursuing new dreams and opportunities, no matter what age you're at. Until next time, I'm wishing you a delicious day everywhere you glow. Cheers from Boston. Listeners, I'm so grateful you carved out time to tune in and grab the gems from this delicious conversation. Be sure to hop on over to Don't Be Caged by Your Age on LinkedIn or Instagram to share your thoughts about ageism and unretirement. Because in this space, your age doesn't define you, it refines you. If you are inspired by a story you hear, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe, share, rate, and review the podcast. To receive an alert whenever a new show is posted, please join the Don't Be Caged by Your Age newsletter. Every month, you'll receive links to the podcast and helpful resources for creating possibilities for your unretirement days. Thank you for tuning in. I am so excited to hear how you found ways to thrive after 65. Waving from Boston, cheers.